Now, this upcoming budget has been described as a tough balancing act by commentators after disagreements within the Government of National Unity led to the original budget being posted in an unprecedented move. Economists say the main highlight of this budget will be how government plans to fund its priorities after the 2 percentage point value-added tax increase was blocked. This would have pushed up the VAT in South Africa to 17%. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is expected to present the national budget on Wednesday against the backdrop of low economic growth, a constrained fiscus and an uncertain global environment. For more expanding on the likelihoods here, we're joined by economist at Stellenbosch Business School, Professor Andre Roux. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Roux. We're learning, of course, that last-minute negotiations could see this small VAT increase implemented to get the budget passed. What are your expectations?
Yes, good evening. Thanks for the invitation. You know, we're in unknown territory in many ways. I think at the heart of the dispute is the 60 billion rand gap that needs to be plugged. And obviously the 2 percentage point increase in the VAT rate went down like a ton of lead. So back to the drawing board in terms of how to plug that gap. Now, there are various options. Obviously, one would be a small increase in the VAT rate. And you were quite right, news is coming through, messages reading between the lines. We might be looking at a 0.5 percentage point increase in the VAT rate. That will be enough to plug the gap. So then you have to start looking at other possibilities. And mathematically, there are many ways of doing this. One would be to raise other forms of taxes. Another would be to slash government spending. Another would be to borrow more money. But economically, financially, socially, politically, many of these options are just not palatable. So you've got to choose the least of the evils. What would be presumably have the least damage, incur the least damage on the economy? And that's where it becomes a bit of a guessing game. Ideally, one would like to see a tightening of government spending, less wastage, less unfruitful spending. We also note that the Commissioner of SARS has said on more than one occasion, we don't need to raise tax rates, but give them a bit more money, a few more resources, and there's up to 800 billion rands worth of uncollected tax that's falling through the net. So there are various ways of juggling and managing this problem. The one we don't want to see happening is borrowing more money. We all know that the government debt is an unacceptably high level with all kinds of burdens on the economy. Just one more point, and that is, as much as the focus is now fallen on filling that gap, my concern is that we're losing sight of an even bigger picture, and that is we need policies and ways and means of actually growing the economy. That's a real challenge, a growing economy, creating jobs, reducing inequality, reducing poverty.
Yeah.
And that would, to me, that's what I'd be looking for.
You mentioned 60 billion rand. I'm assuming that would have been the original plan to hike VAT by 2 percentage points to 17% would have equated to that. You keep talking about plugging the gaps. I mean, what are we talking to as we look at the realities on the ground and scrutinize the economy?
Yeah. Well, if we go back to the October medium-term framework and we look at the estimate of spending then for the next 3 years, this time around, or in the not read budget, in the non-event budget, he was looking for an additional 180 billion, so roughly 60 billion per year for the next 3 years, over and above what he mentioned back in October. And that's the gap I'm talking about. Now, why that increase? Well, because of an even bigger civil servants wage bill, the 5.5% increase, which is unfortunate, but you can't take that away. That's been negotiated. And then naturally the social distress fund, the so-called COVID fund. Now, by rights, that was supposed to be a 1-year program. It's become a multi-year program. And again, we can't see him taking that away. If anything, he wants to improve or increase the amount ever so slightly. And then he also has built in additional spending for things such as trying to keep teachers and doctors and not having to get rid of them. So these things put together give us a bigger requirement. At the same time, he's downgraded his growth forecast for the year, which means the tax base is hardly moving at all. So therefore, you've got to find some way of, as I say, plugging the 60 billion gap. And therein lies a challenge. What is the most acceptable way of doing that?
So in the Finances Minister's efforts to raise revenue, there are also other concerns which are mounting. I mean, if we look at Eskom's ongoing financial struggles and the possibility of these increases to cover the power utilities shortfall. I mean, we keep hearing over and over that Eskom cannot be allowed to fail.
Absolutely. I mean, infrastructure of that nature is non-negotiable. There's another newly emerging pressure, of course, and that is the cancellation by Mr. Trump of age-related aid. That gap has to be filled as well. Otherwise, hundreds of thousands of people might die in this country because they won't have access to the appropriate medicine. That also has to be taken into account. Another thing, talking about Mr. Trump, is that depending upon what happens here onwards with all his shenanigans, we might see economic growth here being even lower than initially thought. That would further narrow the tax base. So it really is, I mean, we say it every year, it really is a difficult balancing act.
And just trying to get it passed. I mean, there's so much at stake, and of course, revenue needs to be raised. In terms of expectations, I mean, and the impact on the day-to-day consumer, what are we looking at?
Well, I mean, whatever option he chooses is going to be painful to somebody. Obviously, the VAT rate increase will be painful for consumers, and especially the poorer consumers. We know that. If he were to fiddle around with personal income tax, then the biggest victims would be middle income and high income taxpayers, already bearing a big part of the burden. If he were to raise the corporate tax rate, that might deter international investment and cut back on profits. So there are no winners in all of this. The best he can do is to try to reduce the losses to the losers.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for weighing in on this discussion. Of course, all eyes on that budget speech come Wednesday. Speaking there to economists at Stellenbosch Business School, Professor Andre Roux.